All right, let's talk about professional boundaries. And so, professional boundaries are essentially really what it does is it establishes appropriate interaction between CHWs and their clients. So, think of it as the guidelines that really establish the appropriate interaction between CHWs and their clients. So, um, these boundaries really define the limits of professional relationships to ensure that they're ethical, that they ensure ethical conduct. They pro- they protect both the client and the CHW from conflicts of interest, favoritism, and other involvements. They prevent the dual relationship where a CHW may have a personal professional connection to a client, like a friend, neighborhood, or a family member. Dual relationships and boundaries are risky. And so a dual relationship occurs when a CHW interacts with the client in multiple roles beyond their professional capacity. So example of dual relationships, a CHW providing case management for their friend or neighbor, a CHW becoming emotionally involved with the client beyond professional support, a CHW engaging in business transactions, so selling products or offering personal favors with the client. While some dual relationships are unavoidable in tight-knit communities, CHWs must be mindful of how these relationships impact objectivity, confidentiality, and service quality. And the risk of crossing boundaries is when a CHW fails to maintain professional boundaries, it can have negative consequences for both the client and the CHW. And there's oftentimes blurred roles which create unrealistic expectations. So a client may expect special treatment, personal favors, or access to resources that are outside the CHW role. CHWs may feel pressure to take on responsibilities that exceed their scope of practice. Confidentiality risks may occur too. So by sharing personal information with a client, so if you have one client and you're sharing information with another client about a client, like that could be problematic. Or you might have a client that's a family member and you're sharing that client's information with another family member. Clients may feel obligated to disclose personal details to a CHW they know outside of work, even if they're uncomfortable doing so. And then also it could cause CHW burnout from over involvement. So, you're trying to keep a professional identity, but then let's say you go to a family party and the neighbor's there and you're the CHW for the neighbor, and now the neighbor wants to talk about their health issues with you when you're trying to unwind, right? So you want to make sure that you set clear boundaries where this is professional and this is personal. And when you don't get an opportunity to turn off, it become emotionally exhausting and stressful and lead to burnout, meaning that you might want to quit, right? But really, all you need is a vacation and you need a break from constantly being on all the time. So CHWs may feel a personal responsibility for fixing every aspect of a client's life, increasing job-related stress and reducing effectiveness. Self-disclosure. So oftentimes, when helping a client, you might want to share out your personal life, your personal experiences. And this is called self disclosure when you start sharing about yourself. And it could be a very useful tool, right? It could actually help build rapport, establish trust, but it really needs to be done carefully to avoid shifting the focus away from the client. Remember, we need to practice person-centered care. The focus needs to always be on the client. Even when you share about yourself, you don't want the client to all of a sudden feel emotional or feel like they need to show you empathy and care and concern. Remember, you're the one sharing the care and concern for the client, not the other way around. And so, when we do self disclosure, it needs to be thoughtful and it needs to be strategic when doing so. And before sharing personal experiences, CHWs must evaluate the potential benefit, risk, and appropriateness of the disclosure. So, important considerations of self disclosure is the benefit, alternatives, burden on the client, nature of the information that is being disclosed, context, and timing. So when we think about the benefit, does the self-disclosure help the client? At the end of the day, you need to practice person-centered care. So anything you do in that professional role has to benefit the client. That's the only reason why you're there is to benefit the client. So before sharing personal information, CHW should ask, will this help the client feel understood and supported? Does this add value to the conversation? Does it encourage the client to take positive action? While it is a problem if the benefit is unclear, like if the self-disclosure does not help the client make progress or take action, it could become a distraction rather than a support. Self-disclosure should never shift the focus to the CHW or serve as personal, right? It shouldn't be a personal thing for the CHW. Everything should be focused on the client. So what is inappropriate? I had the same problem and struggle for years before I figured it out. This shifts the focus from the CHW's experience, or shifts the focus to the CHW's experience. Appropriate one is, I worked with others who felt nervous about seeing a doctor and they found it helpful to write down their questions before the appointment. Would you like help with that? So you are explaining what, even if this is what you did, right? You're explaining a solution that worked for someone else, and you are providing support if they decide that they want to take on that solution. So really what it does is keeping the focus on the client's needs. Alternatives is, sometimes you need to make sure, look at, is it even appropriate to share? It may be appropriate, but are there alternatives to self-disclosing? So instead of self-disclosing, maybe do empathy without a personal story. So that sounds really tough. Can I see why you feel that way? Or reflective listening. It sounds like you're feeling frustrated and heard by your doctor. What would help you feel more supported? Or peer community examples. Many people in similar situation have found support through doing yada yada yada. And then, so why is it a problem if self-disclosure is overused? Clients may feel they must comfort the CHW instead of focusing on their own challenges. If self-disclosure is frequent, it can make the CHW seem emotionally dependent rather than a professional support. And then when to choose an alternative. So if the CSW experiences is too personal or emotionally charged, or if sharing will not provide meaningful support or solution to the client. Burden on the client. So once again, CHW should consider whether the self-disclosure places an emotional burden on the client. So will this help the client or make them feel obligated to comfort the CHW? Will it shift the emotional weight onto the client instead of helping them? So why is this a problem if a client feels burdened? Clients who are already struggling should not feel responsible for supporting the CHW emotionally. This can damage trust and discourage the client from opening up further. And so examples of inappropriate burden, CHWs. So CHW, I went through a really hard time when I lost my job. I was devastated. And the client now feels pressure to comfort the CHW instead of focusing on their own struggles. Instead, you can try, losing a job can feel overwhelming, but there are support programs that might help. Would you like me to connect you with some resources? So keep the conversation client centered. And also understanding the nature of the information that is being disclosed. So really want to disclose relevant and professional topics. Avoid discussing intimate, sensitive, or unrelated personal experiences. Never disclose information that could undermine the professional credibility, like your personal health struggles that suggest the CHW is unqualified to provide guidance. Um, why is it important if the information is too personal? So clients need to feel that CHWs are stable, professional, and capable of supporting them. Sharing details about personal health issues, financial struggles, or emotional hardships may make the CHW seem unable to provide guidance. They're like, well, if you're struggling with it, then how can you possibly help me get over this, right? So you don't want to share too much of your personal, even though that also might be your struggle bus. You don't want to disclose that is your struggle, but then the client's looking at you like, well, if you're struggling, how you're going to give me advice? So examples of inappropriate disclosure is a CHW. I have anxiety too, and sometimes I just shut down completely. It's really hard. Once again, it takes the focus away from the client and may make them feel like the CHW is struggling too much to help. So appropriate disclosure. Well, I know that navigating the healthcare system can feel confusing at first, but there are always ways to make it easier. Would it help to go over some key steps together? And then also we need to consider the context when we are doing self-disclosure. So consider who else is present, right? Is this a private conversation or a group setting? Assess the client's emotional state. So, are they really ready to engage or will they disclose about their stress? Be mindful of power dynamics. So, will this shift the relationship from professional to personal in a way that is unhelpful? Some of the things to consider is self-disclosure in public settings or group discussions can make the client feel uncomfortable. If the client is in crisis, a personal story from the CHW may not be helpful or relevant at that moment. So examples of poor context is a CHW shares their personal traumas with a client who is already overwhelmed and seeking immediate support. A good example is a CHW shares a brief, empowering example in a one-on-one setting to normalize the client's experience and encourages them to take action. We also need to think about the timing. So when we think about the timing, early in the relationship, the use of self-disclosure should be sparing. Clients need a space to share their own experiences first, and the client. So we need to consider, has the client had time to express their own concerns fully before you really start opening up about yourself? Also need to think about, are you sharing during a time of emotional distress? We need to be very cautious of sharing out when a client is seeking support, and instead of you offering support, you're offering personal stories. So is a client in a state of distress where they need immediate support? Remember, if you share out your story and the client needs support, they may feel compelled to now focus on you instead of focusing on themselves. And we want the client to stay focused and focus on their own problems. When the client is ready to take action, briefly, relevant disclosure can motivate and empower them. So will the disclosure help the client take action or reflect productively? And so sharing personal stories too early in the relationship can create discomfort or blur professional boundaries. If a client is in crisis, they may not benefit from hearing about the CHW's past experience. They need immediate resources and emotional support. Some examples of bad timing is a CHW shares a personal experience right after a client discloses a traumatic event, shifting focus away from the client's needs. And then a good timing example is a CHW shares a brief success story about another client who overcame a similar challenge after helping the client develop a plan to take the next steps. So some risks and benefits of self-disclosure. So remember, self-disclosure is when the CHW is sharing their personal stories. It's really important to build rapport and establish trust. Some benefits of it is it helps normalize clients' experiences by showing understanding and empathy. It also strengthens the client CHW relationship by making them feel less alone in their struggle. When they hear someone else has gone through this, they're like, okay, I'm not the only one here who's going through this. But is the risk of it is a redirection of the conversation on the CHW of personal life instead of keeping the focus on the client. We want to make sure we are person-centered, client-centered care. And then it may create a dependency where the client sees the CHW as a person, as a confidant, rather than a professional. So some key takeaways of all this is self-disclosure should only be used if it benefits the client. Alternatives like empathy and reflective listening may be more effective. CHW should avoid placing emotional burdens on clients. And we need to consider the nature, context, and timing of self-disclosure. And then also self-disclosure should never undermine the CHW's credibility or professionalism. And so some guidelines for responsible self-disclosure is keep it brief, keep it relevant, and refocus the discussion on the client's needs.